Welcome back to another episode here on the Hart and Hustle podcast with a gentleman that I like to say is a brother from another mother, maybe another father. Who knows? We're both adopted and we're both in this seed. Kind of had to start it off, but I also had to show you this real quick, man, because this is how excited I was today, man. I had to pull this shirt out. This is a oldie but
Right.
goodie. Look at this.
Yeah, man.
And right here on the end of it was actually when I was doing clothing. It's actually my logo. When I had a cafe, I took that same logo. But adopted, man, I wear this so proudly, especially when I'm at the gym. And people was like, man, I love that you just wear that so proudly. But I'm
Yeah.
also proud because, as we both know, statistically, we shouldn't be here, Ken. But you're in an exciting seat. If you can talk about the role that you're in, man, and who you are.
Yeah. So I'm the CEO of the Hope Group, which is a behavioral healthcare platform, which just means I'm in the healthcare space and have an overseeing role for four different entities that provide mental health care and behavioral health care from teenagers all the way through adults.
I love that. And what got you into this space, man?
Yeah, so I've been in behavioral health care for my whole career. So I finished a PhD at Purdue University in marriage and family therapy. And I'm just looking for a job. And I want to get back out west. I've been out in the Midwest for a long time. Want to go to Utah, looking for a job, and I find something in a residential treatment center as a direct care therapist. Okay, so I apply, and I get this, and I'm at this really old school residential treatment center with some great training and various issues and stuff too, but it was really good, powerful training. And what I loved was that here was an environment where you control all of the variables that support bad behavior. For instance, if you're in residential, I can control the music you listen to. I can keep you away from really bad friends. I can keep you away from drugs and partying and running away from school. And you take all that away, and you could really get some movement with teenage girls is who I was working with. And so I just fell in love with that modality. And what landed me where I am here is that I'm adopted. I have a high ACEs score. We can talk about that as we go along. And I was noticing that there were all these adopted kids in treatment. It was about 35% of them. With some quick research, I found out that 2% of the U.S. population's adopted, but 35% in treatment locations, that just didn't make any sense. And that started me on a journey to understand what that was about. Ultimately, it's about trauma. Adoption is a trauma, but I think a good trauma, generally. And that had me then creating the career path that built something for what I see as my people. So there's the short version. We'll talk more about it as we go.
I love that. I love that you took your past trauma and what has happened in the past and realizing how do I make it better. I think we spoke about this when I first met you. Was it's not even about us anymore, right? Like we're both very successful in our own industries, and it's how do we continue to make sure that others get to see the same success. And it is really in the space that you're in, and I don't know that so I actually asked a question yesterday to two of my neighbors because it seems I went over, Ken, and it's Friday night or Saturday night. I had a bottle of Jim Beam and I go over to my friend's house right across the street and I say, hey guys, you guys want to drink? And my other neighbor, he always usually says no or sometimes yes, once in a blue. The other one said no. And then he gets into the whole wine and spirits and kind of telling the backstory, but also mentioned that he stopped drinking 10 years ago. I said, oh, wow. So I asked the question, right? That's what I normally do. Yeah, what made you stop drinking? He says, every time I started drinking, it led to more problems. It led to, the drug use now at this point. And for 9 years, he's 35 years old. For 9 years, this is something that he suffered with. And I had another question because I didn't have mom and dad, right? They had both mom and dad. What made you guys users? What made you guys go down this space? Was it because mom and dad just weren't there? Like, what was that life look like? Because it's always to me intriguing when someone has mom and dad and their life still kind of takes a different toll in life, right?
Yeah.
Someone like myself and maybe like you, I just had mom. I was adopted and it was just mom. But I realized I didn't use drugs. Like, it wasn't the space I was in. And when he asked me, I had to remember because my mom is still a drug addict, because my mom is still homeless, my biological mom. And I just feel that God makes sure I never used that. Even though I had friends that were doing that, they knew that that just wasn't my mindset. So I ask you, when we talk about this space of people go through trauma, even with both parents there, right? We talk about adoptees, but this is huge. This is again bigger than us. What are you seeing at the young level? When people is talking about behavioral health, like what are some of the things that get people to these spaces where now they need the assistance?
Yeah. So, what creates the issues for somebody? We now know, thanks to ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, that trauma is at the root of the majority, simple majority, not vast majority, but the majority of mental health, social health issues, and physical health issues. The short version is, and I'd encourage anybody listening, if you don't know about ACEs, to go to aces2high.org, ACES TOOHIGH.org, and you can find out more about this. But basically, there was a researcher, became a couple of researchers, trying to understand the antecedent to morbid obesity in women. They kind of accidentally slipped in a question about sexual abuse and ultimately figured out that 64% of women, I believe, that are morbidly obese have been sexually abused. And that just totally changed the study. So with more research, they were able to narrow it down to 10 different types of trauma that happens in early childhood years that creates a predisposition for a whole lot of issues. So, and this will make some sense. So if from a young age, let's say that I'm sexually abused and it goes on for 3 or 4 years, and somebody just touches me and I start to know that means I'm within 5 minutes of some unwanted sexual advance. That flips on my fight or flight mechanism, and I start having that on all the time because the rapist isn't somebody in the shadows, it's somebody at the house usually. Mm-hmm. And so my body is hyper aroused all the time in not a good way. I'm scanning the environment, I'm worried, I have stress hormones and cortisol bathing my brain. That breaks the body down so that physically I have issues later on. Those of us with an ACEs of 4 or more of the 10 have a 1,200% chance of getting an STD in our lives. We've got higher blood pressure, higher cholesterol, more heart disease, early death, and then all the social issues. We have more divorces, more imprisonment. We have, just all kinds of issues, more mental health issues and all that. So all of a sudden, in the last 35 years, this study has gotten more and more traction and people are understanding, oh wow, this is about trauma, changing the brain, making the brain, breaking the brain down in some ways with these stress hormones and getting us to a place where we're always worried about problems and we can't then relax and be in relationship and be safe and have then a productive life without turning that around. And basically you have to rewire the brain and turn it back around to where connection is again safe. That's the biggest piece of it. Mm-hmm. So if I'm in that hyper aroused, anxious state and I find drugs or alcohol and I find out that when I take the alcohol, I feel okay for a couple of hours, 3 or 4 hours, oh wow, it's pretty tempting to move into that in a pretty big way. And so the incidence of drug and alcohol addiction among those with a high ACEs score is very, very high. And those with mental health issues, very high. They have personality disorders, they have depression, they have bipolar disorder, they have ADHD. I mean, it just makes the wheels come off socially and physically.
Yeah, and it goes back to these kids don't need generic care, right? They need people who get it, people that lived it or studied it deep, in a sense. Because everything that you're mentioning, man, I can relate. The sexual abuse part. It was so hard when I first started even talking about it, and my wife wanted to ask these questions. I used to get so mad, Ken, and tell her. I remember one time being really upset and said, "Ask one more question, and that's it. I don't want to answer these questions anymore." Like now, because that's me first opening, and it would hurt, having these conversations. Why does general therapy miss the mark, though, you think, for adoptees and foster youth?
Yeah, you think about it, the instant bond that you and I had when I just talked about being adopted, and both of us have been sexually abused, and we've got this high ACEs score, I am just drawn to other people that fundamentally get the makeup of me. And it's not perfect understanding of me, but it's a shortcut. And I know that you get an idea of why I am where I am. And if I'm in treatment, going towards the treatment arena, a generalist just applying generalist, behavioral tools or whatever, but not really understanding the root cause and that the brain is damaged and that Dr. Bruce Perry and others, Bessel van der Kolk and Gabor Mate and those, that they really get the thing to apply. I'll do something that has some good attached, but to really understand what creates it allows me to be much more surgical in my application of attachment theory and interventions so I can get better and more long-lasting movement. You need specialty care. Generalist is okay. I'll take it. Specialist is better.
Yeah. What does that real trauma-informed care actually look like when you talked about what you guys are doing? And not just that buzzword stuff, right? Like really for someone to understand, what does it actually look like to get into this space of getting the assistance needed?
Yeah, it's funny. Here I am adopted. I have this high ACEs score. And 2002, I land in a residential treatment center and I'm just seeing all the adopted kids. I really hadn't been trained in my PhD program to understand the effects of trauma. I had to start doing the research on my own. I became a specialist in trauma, attachment, and all that in 2003 and 4, and ultimately then went and launched, a specialty program for that. So what does it mean? It means understanding at a foundational root that when you pair, any sort of stimulus like touch with sex, and that becomes the message in my brain, that is a maladaptive attachment. And I got to change that. And if you break it apart, what you've got is a neuron that says touch equals and is connected to sex. That means I'm never going to really quite understand safe touch. So I've got to have enough safe touch that I overrule and override this neural pairing of touch equals connection with somebody I can trust. And I get enough neural pairings around that and it defeats now or can be stronger than the bad neural pairing. If I don't understand that, I'm not truly doing trauma work. Trauma work and just trying to be experiential, cool, but you've got to have experts across your organization to really do deep, good trauma work. And trauma it's just become a buzzword. We try and stay away from it generally because it doesn't mean enough anymore. But that's basically at the heart of it, is becoming experts in what created it and then specific interventions that fix it. So quickly, that's experience. Experience creates the neural pairings that are not adaptive. And new experience creates better neural pairings that are pro-social and adaptive, helpful in our lives. That's the quick version.
Ken, what a journey to get here, man. Because you sold the business that started, got into this space. You were really retired, right? Was that it? You sold the business and retired?
Yeah, I did. So I started a place called Calo, C-A-L-O. It's in Missouri. And had an amazing team. We built this trauma-focused place for 96, at any given time it was 95 to 98% adopted kids. And coming out of the foster care system or Eastern European bloc, and have all this trauma, and we're helping them get better. And it was just phenomenal. Great team. We did great work. And ultimately we got purchased. I had a minority ownership stake. And we had a group come in and buy us. And helped build that for some length of time, brought on some other programs that were complementary, started building a platform that ultimately became Embark Behavioral Health. Right before it really became all of that, I left in 2015, sold the rest of my ownership, and Embark's done some amazing things and become really big, and that's exciting. So I go and retire, buy a lake house, get up every day at 7 o'clock and go water skiing with my kids and then send them to school. It's really fun. And by the end of the first summer, I'd had a blast, and then my kids went back to school, and it wasn't any fun. The next summer, I was kind of bored, still kind of cool, but by the end of the second summer, I'm like, this is stupid. I'm not waiting all year to have fun again while my kids are at school. I got to get to work. And my wife was like, this is a bad look. You're some stay-at-home dad, but you're not doing any of that stuff. You're just so yeah, I was able to hook up with a great group of people in Cedar City doing work at what was called Havenwood Academy, and that became the basis for the Hope Group. They already had that entity but weren't using it, so I'm making it too long. But anyway, Havenwood
No, I love
became
that.
the platform for the Hope Group, and then we've expanded and we've got 4 different sites in young adult and outpatient, intensive outpatient, and just doing some really great work that's getting recognized and doing well.
And is this local? Is this throughout the country? What does the organization look like when it comes to just scaling?
You bet. Our referrals for all of the teen residential comes from across the country. I don't think we have a single Utah kid, and we've got 45 or so in residence, boys and girls. Just started the boys program in the Salt Lake area. And then the young
Oh,
adult comes from all over the country too, and they're in Cedar City and they go to Southern Utah University and get jobs and stuff like that. And then we've got an outpatient in Salt Lake, and that is all local, where it's intensive outpatient and partial hospitalization. And it's called Emerge, all women led for traumatized women, and they come and get really terrific care there in that local community. So that's the general gist of it,
I
and
love
we're
that.
expanding.
And you mentioned just adding the boys program. Was that just because we wanted to get the women's program done right and then move on to boys, or did you realize the boys were just more in need? Like, where did that come about in the last, I'm guessing, couple of years or so?
Yeah, so growth is one of our 4 core values, and growth is kind of personal. I believe in sharpening the saw, as Stephen Covey would say. And so, listening to great podcasts like your own and Alex Hormozy and, you know, Tim Ferriss, and always trying to sharpen that saw. But it's also growth in terms of the business. You're never holding still. There is no such thing as coasting. That's death. You're growing or you're dying, one or the other.
Mm.
And we believe in growth, so we were always looking for the next opportunity and had been considering and brought on the leader for the boys program 7, 8 months ago and started looking for a site and just barely got that all ready to go and opened last week. So yeah, we're always looking to grow. We'll get our feet under ourselves for the next probably year, and then we'll be looking probably towards the eastern side of the United States.
That's good. How does it make you feel, man, to know that you do have this bros program coming in? I mean, obviously, we're males, and knowing that when it comes to, we just don't have a lot of male role models. At least I didn't see that growing up. So I think this is huge that you guys have a boys program. Obviously, someone that's kind of been in the system, so understands that as well. Um, how does that make you feel knowing that you're now going into this space?
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. We got a guy named Charlie Falatea who's got deep background in the residential treatment world, and he's running it. And he is such a good role model for these kids. Just this gregarious, smart Polynesian stud who knows how to mentor these guys and bring the right team together that can do the same thing. Brings on a lot of his Polynesian culture and friends, and they do some really terrific work with these guys. So it's pretty fun, man. I get emails and texts still from kids that I worked with 20 years ago talking about, there's one that's an attorney, was over in China for a while, and she was close to death when she arrived at the residential program where I was. And to see that kind of success, she's married, she's happy, and I could name a bunch of those kinds of stories. That's amazing. To come out of the trauma world, things aren't going well, and they're on a path to where mom and dad are worried about, having to identify a body. I've had that said to me. To success interpersonally and professionally, that's pretty great.
No, it is, man. I'm excited. I'm excited to really learn more about, not learn because I already kind of understand what's going on, but just to see the growth in the boys program. I think it's such. There's just so much lack there. Even me being back in the old high school, I really got into it mentoring because I didn't have that growing up, but I wish I did have that. I think it was so important that I did have that. So now got into the space of doing what I wished I had when I was growing up, right? To be there. So I would show up, and it was just a group of young colored men, that didn't have that father figure at home or just didn't have that male figure in their lives. And just to show up every single Tuesday with them in bow ties, because they were supposed to show up in bow ties, so I'll show up with them. And the opportunities on how that really changes somebody. I'm a big believer that it just takes one person to really change, someone's life. I sit here and think about where I'm at in my life, and I can imagine you can attest to this, is we got here because we had great people in our lives that seen us for who we were and not for what was going on in that moment. and allowed us to just move forward, throughout our lives. So being that for someone and knowing that you guys found someone that can do that for other men, for other young boys, and they can see the other side, I think it's cool. It's cool. It's cool that you're retired. It's life happens for reasons, right? I always say you retired, had fun, got bored, and said, how do I continue to have fun? You're having fun, I can imagine. Does this feel like work at any time?
Yeah, I'm having a great time. I'd like to talk a little bit about what you just said too. That this, a decent person being a mentor for you. So the ACEs, the great mitigator of a high ACEs score, is at least one securely attached adult as a mentor in your life. That can undo the damage or diminish a whole bunch of it. Just one person, and like you say, you had somebody that did that for you. I had a guy named Vern Spires, just a dude from church. He died a few years ago, not even knowing quite what he did that changed the trajectory of my life. He just believed in me so much. My adopted dad was another one of those, and absent those guys in my life, the same path as me, or the same ACEs score as me. I've got a little brother who's a year and 2 days younger, and he did not get that mentoring. He just did not. And he's at Utah State Prison, and it's got another 10 or 12 years before he'll be out. In and out of prison his whole life. And I really think that a huge part of that is not getting that mentoring and a little bit of treatment that could have changed the course for him.
There's a lot of things happening in this space when we talk about adoption. One is the end all adoption. We kind of touched on that as we were talking offline at some point, but also was very surprised on what Trump just did, right? And putting so much focus on foster kids. What is your thoughts on all this, man? Like, I think this is huge for it to be
Yeah.
now kind of highlighted at that level where the president's talking on national TV. But then we also have, you mentioned something about end all adoption. I don't know, a little kind of weird on what's kind of happening on both sides. What is your thoughts?
Yeah, I gotta say, I'm incredibly grateful. Melania, I think, is behind this from everything I can understand. I don't think, doesn't look like it was necessarily Trump's big bailiwick or anything. He would have done something about, but he did, to his credit. And holy moly, this could be a big game changer. If there are dollars, that then means eyeballs and resources flowing toward that population. That's a big deal. The kids in foster care, I want to make sure I get these stats right, but if they age out in foster care, they have an almost 50% chance of winding up homeless and on the streets. Oh my gosh. And just having been in foster care, it's 1 in 10 of those that spend time homeless then and on the streets at some point. So, and then all the mental health issues and everything that go with it. So this is a population that needs our attention and help right now, and this could be a really big deal. We're hoping to figure out how to deploy some of those dollars to add those kids that have aged out to our Engage program that is the transitional stuff we do in Cedar City. It would be phenomenal.
I love that. There was actually talking about that transition space. There was an organization out in Detroit, and I can get it to you offline if you want. But I was very intrigued on this woman that sold her house to build a facility. So she was an educator. There was a research happening at, I forgot what the college was. The research got so intense that they needed a place for these young kids to actually stay. So they got a place, and some of these kids just kind of ran away from home because of trauma, or kids that aged out, so they're homeless. So these are young, young teens in a sense. Um, it got to the point of getting so big because so many kids are just showing up here and they're really making a difference that they're trying to get this church right. And she talks the story on one day she remembers going outside looking at a lot across the street and saying, one day I'm going to have a facility where these kids can actually live. She shared a story on the news. Someone seen it while he was in the hospital and wanted to meet the woman, right? And the dude was sick. Took him a year to get better. And when he got better, a year later, right, he says, "Hey, I would love to take a walk." It was this big, I forgot, like this big mansion. I forgot who it was. You probably know if I share the story. I have to get you the exact information. But it was this huge mansion that no one was getting, and she just looked at it. She said, "One day this is going to be it." The guy, after being better, shows up, does a walk. He says, "I love what you're doing. I can't give you all the money, but I'm going to give you $500,000. I think she bought 12 acres of land. And now they're starting to really build for these young teens to give them a place. And kind of what we mentioned, she said a lot of these young teens, the reason they're successful now is because they got into this homeless shelter and they had male figures that were willing to also pour back into them. So huge, man, what we're talking about. It goes with so many different organizations doing it. And when we can highlight this at the national level, because I when I see that, you see the crowd go crazy, automatically I thought, wow, we're going to see some changes happen.
Yeah.
And hope. But let's go back to the end adoption. What do you think on that? I can't remember the gentleman you said mentioned that. What was the gentleman's name?
Oh, ending adoption. Yeah. So Moses Farrow, he's actually the son of Woody Allen, an adopted son of Woody Allen and Mia Farrow. And he had a pretty abusive background in his adopted family, being raised by Mia Farrow. And he's landed in this place where he just is extremely persuasive and intense. He's a good, kind, wonderful human being. I've known Moses for years, but he wants to end all adoption. He believes that it is child trafficking at its core, full stop, and that we just need to end all adoption, and then we'll figure out what we do next. They should mostly be staying with their parents. Wow, it's just a stunning kind of position to take, because all right, so what then? See, and I think if I was capturing what he's saying and his belief, he would say, "It doesn't. Don't ask me about what then. We need to end the child trafficking. We can talk about what the next steps are then." I find that to be a little irresponsible. I don't know how you end adoption without some plan in place, and I am not a fan of the idea of ending adoption. Being careful and not having kids go into bad homes, or following up and stopping things if it does turn into that kind of a situation, I think that makes more sense. But anyway, he's kind of at the forefront of that movement. It's a small movement. It's not generally and widely known, but I think it's worth keeping an eye on.
If the Hard and Hustle podcast has ever sparked any idea or made you think differently, do us a favor. Make sure to guys share this, post it on LinkedIn, or even text that nonprofit friend that you just have. Whatever works, this is what keeps the conversation going and allows us to just grow this community together. Seriously, we appreciate you. Yeah. There's a lot of things to keep, yeah, when it comes to the space where we just mentioned, with the Trump administration and there's just so many different things. We don't know what it is, but there's so many great people out there that are doing great things, such as your son. You mentioned that he also adopted
Yeah.
out of foster care. What was that moment like for you, man? When,
Oh
when
man,
you
I
get
got
to see
to.
your son adopt, knowing that you were also adopted?
Yeah, it's interesting because here I'm in this adoption space. I'm working with these kids all the time, and there was never a temptation to go adopt myself because I did it all day for a job already, and it's pretty intense. It takes a lot of emotional energy. So my kids have grown up seeing the work that I do, and given up weekends where I'm just too busy. When I started Kalo with my team, when we started it, I was working 80 hours a week sometimes, and they remember those days. That was hard. So I was shocked when my oldest, who's married now, and they had a couple of kids, they decided that they wanted to foster. And okay, super cool. And then they started talking about adopting. And ultimately, this young girl that had come from a tough situation, I'm not supposed to go into it deeply, which is totally cool. Anyway, she'd come from a tough situation. They fostered the whole time and wound up being able to adopt her. And that's my little granddaughter, Livy. And oh my gosh, the idea that, I can remember holding her. This will get emotional for me, but, here she is, 6 months and a year old, and we know she's going to be adopted in a year. And I'm holding her and I'm just saying, you and me, girl. You don't understand it yet, but I will talk to you about being adopted. You will not be alone in this endeavor. It's pretty beautiful, and they've done a tremendous job. She is just thriving, and it's exciting for me to watch.
Ken, as soon as you said you were getting emotional, I was going to get emotional with you because it does hit harder when you understand the life. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um, I I think the hardest part for me was being a father and seeing my young ones hit the age of where I knew I was stripped away from my mom, right? Like
yeah,
there was emotion there. And I also remember, like, my sister, I don't know why she may feel some type of way, but and we're much older now, but I remember my nieces finding out a little older, maybe 12, 13 years old, that their uncle was adopted, right? To me, it was like nothing. To me, it's like, it's cool now that I'm adopted and I can share this story. My sister felt like why are our other siblings that are not adopted, why are they sharing this story? It's not their story to share. To me, I said, yeah, I am adopted, and I share that story, and I say it now with just so much pride that I am, and it's so special that I was chosen into this family, and yes, life wasn't the best, but man, look where I'm at now today.
Yeah.
And anytime that I can kind of look back at where I'm at today, I'm just so grateful. Actually, the one word that when someone asks me, Efrain, how do you feel about life? Everything you've had to encounter, the trauma, I say I'm so grateful, Ken, because without some of these things that I've experienced in my life, I I can't give the testimony, right? Like there's no testimony without that test, and I feel like there were so many tests in my life that allowed me to be where I'm at today. Allow us to be advocates. Allow others to see, you know, people, men at that, like me and you, and say, "Wow, if these guys did it, so can I."
Yeah.
And there's still some people that don't like to share their story enough, but I'm so glad that I met you, that we're willing to really share this story together, and that you one day can also share the story with your granddaughter. And who knows, your son is really keeping the legacy alive. Of someone gave you a chance, your son is giving someone else that same opportunity.
Yeah.
And it'll keep that moving cycle. And you're still doing it as well. It's not like you're not doing it. You're doing it at a higher level. So, man, you just said that. I don't know. I start getting these emotions, and I get it. I understand why you got emotional. You know what I mean? Like, I also mentioned to you one day, maybe. All right, I got a 1 and a 4 year olds. It's a little tough. But maybe after the 1 and 4 year get a little older, I'm in the space of adopting, man. I've always, since a young kid, I said, hey, I wanted to have 2 kids and adopt 2 kids. It was something that planted since I was a young kid. I don't know where that comes from, but I'm a big believer that there's so many seeds that are planted in our minds, and not by accident,
Yeah.
right? We got to kind of go back and figure why that was a thought at such an early age.
Yeah.
But I love it. Can we show your age? Can I show your age real quick, Ken?
Yeah. Sure.
All right, Ken, you're almost 60, bro. You look good. Okay, I want to tell you that you look good. What keeps you fired up, man? On the court, in your company, like
Yeah.
you still got this energy about you, and
I
so much excitement when you talk about this.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm 59 and I'm happy. Life is good. And I think that I've done things, I've been lucky to have some intervention that allows me to sort of dissipate some of those stress hormones that otherwise would tear my body down. And then I do things to make sure that I feel good and on top of my game. I do weight training 3 or 4 times a week, but the big thing is I play racquetball usually 3 times a week, pickleball, stuff like that. And so I try and stay really active. And that's just fun, 59 years old and still able to go out and find some 20-something-year-old and pound him on the racquetball court, play in some tournament and win, and have them show up and they look at my kind of truncated movements. I don't have a whole lot of range of motion like I used to, and they think they're going to beat up on me, and I do pretty well. That's fun. I get a kick out of that.
I love it. Yeah, no, that's so cool. Listen, I hope when I'm 59, 60 years old, around that age, that I still have just so much energy as you do. I look at my neighbor all the time. I make fun of him. He's 49. I'll call him 50. I said, man, you're an old man. He's like, you wish you can do what I do at this age. But look at you, almost 60. You wish you could do what I do at this age. I love it, man.
I mingle with folks that are kind of the same shape as me, so I'm happy about it and think that it's real achievable. It's not a mystery. It really is just putting in the same work there as you would maybe at work or something, and it embarrasses me to think it's not that special if you'll just work at it. You just a little bit of work at it, and you'll be doing the same thing. You will look like I do at 59 and 60. You'll be doing fantastic. It's just the way that you're built.
Yeah, man, definitely, definitely. What would you say to someone who's carrying a trauma story, Ken, and
Yeah.
still's afraid to tell it? I think that's also happening a lot, especially in our elders.
That's a great point. The demystification of it is a big deal, taking ownership of the story. I do think there's just something in, like you found, telling the story. I did a presentation focused on my own adoption and trauma for the first time probably 15, close to 15 years ago, and that was this keynote that I gave, and it was tough. And it was then the beginning of doing it so much that it doesn't have power over me anymore. And then, my own therapy and work on it.
Mhm.
But, I talk like you do about sexual abuse. It started for me when I was 7 years old. And so if you're triggered by sexual abuse and don't want to hear stuff, I would say skip past the next 60 seconds or so. But For me, it was full penetrative sex by the age of 8 years old, and that's unfortunate. I say that without flinching a whole bunch. You know, it's not painful for me now, but that was the deal, and laid the groundwork for some tough times, and figuring all that out and trying to tease that out and find out healthy sexuality and have a good marriage and work with my kids and not pass this legacy on in some way, even if it's not sexual abuse, but just lingering effects of trauma. That was a big deal to me. I wanted to be what we call a transitional figure. I hope that's the case. My kids seem to believe that that is the case. And that sexual abuse does not rule me, and I'm very pleased about that. Celebrate 35 years of marriage this Wednesday. And wait a minute, Wednesday? Yeah. Oh, it's coming up.
Don't get it wrong, Ken. You're on live now, Ken.
Yeah, 3 more days, so Thursday, I guess. But anyway,
um,
that's great.
no, that is very similar to what you mentioned. That was happening to me at that level for years, and also just telling the story. I remember being very emotional. I mean, it was felt like it was yesterday. The first time I had to tell, not that I had to tell them, but I remember having the conversation with my wife. We talked about that, and then I said, you know what? I'm going to tell my friends. I felt like I was living a lie, and I remember pulling over to this bank because I was on the way to do a deposit for the restaurant I was in at that moment, and I just pulled over, just crying, sending a text message. And I don't know that I ever cried as much after that because that was the first time I ever really mentioned it, and it was hard, and it became easier. And then I started to talk about it publicly, like Facebook. So my mom, that I called my mom that adopted me. She's really my aunt, but this is the first time she's hearing it, and she was in shock. And I remember her. We were out and about at SeaWorld, and she tries to have this conversation with me, like, what happened? And all I could tell her is like, don't worry about it. Just know that life happened. I'm I'm stronger because of it, and I already, dealt with the situation. Because I think I told you that my wife, when I was starting my organization at 20 some years old, she says, "How are you going to help somebody else if you haven't helped yourself, Efrain?" And I was like, "What do you mean? What does that look like to help myself?" And she said, "You need to go have a conversation with the person that was been doing it all along." And I'm like, "Whoa." And to my surprise, I did. Right, I did have the conversation. Felt like I was bringing in a Grammy. I'm not gonna lie to you, Ken, because I was doing something that a lot of people don't have the chance to do.
Yeah.
You know, um, so I had the conversation. What I found out, to my surprise, was that it was happening to him as well. Right, goes back to breaking the cycle that continues. Right, and at some point we have to break that cycle. So it's like, don't be afraid of your story, because the right people will actually meet you in it
Yeah.
and help you along the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm glad that you just opened up as much, because a lot of people won't open up in that sense, but I could definitely relate, man. And I just want people that are watching this to understand you're not alone.
Yeah, thank you. And let me even go a little bit further and talk about this. So there was sexual abuse, and that was pervasive and went on for 3 years or so. And then it's sort of a virus. Once you've got it, you start introducing it too. And I went through a stage like that for a couple of years. Oh man! And then it got arrested, thank heavens, and stopped at the age of 12. Oh, thank heavens. And there was a lot of physical abuse. So here's another thing I would say to anybody listening. You've got to see that having had the experience is a problem, and you've got to figure out what to do to deal with that, to dissipate it and have it not be normal for you, and to also not carry shame. Like the level of shame I carried and the belief that I couldn't sustain a relationship, that lasted
Yeah.
forever. It was awful. Okay, so the physical abuse, I was, there's no way around it. I was beaten by my mom. She had a paddle, and Tri-Delta sorority paddle, and she's using using that on us as, I don't know, 9, 10 years old for many years. And I don't know what happened to her. I've never been able to fully get the history, and I had we talk about, I had an ayahuasca experience that helped me reconcile with her. We'll chat about that if we want. But anyway, the physical abuse, I believe spanking was kind of part of the recipe, and was wondering, but then I had this experience with my oldest son at the age of a year and a half maybe, and I spanked him and left a bruise. A 1.5-year-old, and I spanked him. And I left this bruise. My mother-in-law was in town. She sees this when she's changing his diaper, I'm realizing, oh my gosh, I am on the path to continuing what I said I would never do. I'm not going to be a transitional figure in this way. So I removed, and it was not easy. It took some just gut work. Removed spanking and physical, corporal punishment out of my repertoire, and I just didn't parent that way, and that was a game changer. Still have to work on my intensity. My older kids talk about that to some extent. There's funny stories and also understanding on their part. But I've just slowly become a more patient, connected dad, and not allowed this to rule the way that I interact with my children. So, to those listening, if you see any seeds of it, do something. Find the help. Figure out how to change the way that you are. It's possible to do.
Yeah, it is. The one moment that I can remember, I had a moment, and my mom, I was always scared to talk to her. You know, she had 7 kids, 2 jobs, and now I get it as an adult. I get it, right? She was very overwhelmed at work. It was a lot. There were 7 different characters at home. This person doing this, like she just didn't know how to control her anger, I would say, or control. And I get it, now. But one day, I always said my mom was very you just never know when she was in a good mood. So that's why I never really asked questions. It was our relationship was very tough growing up because I just didn't know when to talk to her, when to not talk to her. So anyway, I remember something happening, and I think my wife said something, and it just triggered me. And this is when I have my young daughter. I only had the one, but all I can think is I think I threw something across the room, right, in anger, and my wife is just standing there, almost in fear, and fear because oh my God, our young daughter, right, and I remember walking away like oh my God, I can't believe I got to that point. I can't believe it. And I obviously apologized, had to have the conversation. Like, there's moments in my life as well, Ken, and I'm so early on. I can imagine that this is just really the beginning, where I had to remember what you mentioned. We're here to break cycles, right? We're here to, we just don't have to be afraid anymore. We just have to do the right things. We have to work very hard. People look at us, and I can imagine people say this, you're lucky, you're blessed. It is so much work. It is so much work that there's times that I ask myself, why can't I just be normal? But what is normal? We all have a story, right?
Oh man.
Why can't I just go and work this 9 to 5? Because God didn't see that in our future, right? Like He's given us this worth ethic to continue even after you retired. Who are you kidding? You thought that was your plan to retire. God's plan was much bigger than that. So, man, we're really having a great conversation around this. I love what you guys have been doing in the organization. And as we start to wrap this up, Ken, because we could do this over and over, we might have to have a part 2. Because when we talk about just trauma and at that level, that we can really continue on that space. But where can people find more about you, your story, if you have something, a platform, website, LinkedIn, whatever that may look like, but also to find out more about the organization? What is the URL for that?
So anybody that wants to know more about the Hope Group can go to hopegrouphealth.com. And I have a podcast called The Voice of Hope. And you can find that anywhere that you find podcast stuff, Voice of Hope. And, there's more about me. Not so much me. It's mostly about the people that I interview. But that's okay. That you can get a little bit of information along those lines. That's probably the place to go.
I didn't know this. So you're a host as well?
That's right.
Oh my God, Ken! So you're in the hot seat today. This is a little different for you right now.
I've done this a fistful of times, and I probably should have mentioned that. I'm sorry.
No, I love it.
Yeah.
Now I feel like I'm being judged at the end of this. I'm gonna ask you,
man.
how did I do?
You know what? As I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, why am I not having Efrain come be with me? So you got to come down and be on my podcast too.
We got to do it. We got to do it. So I ask you this question before we wrap it up. This is the blind question we ask our leaders. If you could sit down with your adopted mom today, what would you say to her, knowing everything you know now?
My adopted mom, the woman who abused me, and I say that with no anger, truly. I got to say this pretty much about a year before she died, a year and a half before she died, and it made the death. I was there the whole time, right there, whispering in her ear as she passed away. And I would say the same thing that I was able to say. And I got to have this powerful spiritual experience with an ayahuasca retreat where I realized that she was doing truly the best she could. And so I went to her bedside. She wasn't functioning very well, staying with her at the time of this retreat. And so I went to her bedside. I put my forehead up against her forehead. And she was a little shocked. We weren't very close.
Mm-hmm.
And I just put my forehead against her forehead and I said, I know you did everything you could. No shame. I'm not angry. I love you. Thank you for giving me everything that you could. It's okay. You've done good stuff. And that love allowed us to bust down some walls. And she wasn't a safe person, and so we didn't get super close or anything after that. But I hope it broke down some fear and let me and other family, my wife, some of my kids, be there and take care of her. We were those last 3 days as she was just actively dying. We were right there with her. So that's what I'd say.
Wow. Well, Ken, I appreciate you, man. You are a tough cookie, for sure, man. And almost at 60 years old, still making a difference. And I love that. And I hope to be your age, still having these conversations about making a difference, breaking cycles, because it's not happening with just you. It's happening with myself. It's happening to so many people that are listening. And if you ever feel in a time that you're alone, you're not. Right. We thank Ken for the conversation. We thank the organization that what you guys are doing and how you guys are helping and now starting this men's program, young boys program. Super excited. And when I'm ever in the area, just know that I'm reaching out. Okay, Ken. And I can't wait to be on your podcast, guys. My name is Efrain. This is Ken. Make sure you guys follow his podcast. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna be there at some point. Hopefully, I don't know. Ken, we thank you.
Be
We'll see
there.
you on the next one.
Thanks, Efrain. Great hanging out with you.
Cheers.